我天天做梦，不是中国梦，不是美国梦，不是澳洲梦，是全世界的梦。你这个梦的内容是什么呢？用什么样的方式来避免这两个大国，美国以及中华人民共和国有战争？如果大家认为那个战争不算是一个21世纪的可能性，我们大家都应该注意到，现在那个乌克兰侵略的那个俄罗斯侵略的乌克兰的那件事，如果我们需要一个实实在在的证据，那个战争是一个现在的可能性，乌克兰的事给我们一个具体的表现。So for me, this is not just an academic challenge, not just a policy challenge, but a personal challenge about what we can all do to avoid a catastrophic conflict between these two great countries. My second point is this. When we analyse US-China, we must understand that there is a changing balance of power between them. China has become more powerful, that is true, economically, militarily, and technologically. And the United States remains very powerful, militarily, economically, and technologically. But the balance of power between them is now, shall we say, more finely balanced. Managed strategic competition has 4 elements, and I'll conclude on this. The first element is we need to very realistically acknowledge what are the strategic red lines which currently exist between China and the United States. We can't ignore them, they exist. They relate to Taiwan, they relate to the South China Sea, they relate to the East China Sea, they relate to the Korean Peninsula, and they relate to cyber and space. A single incident in any of these areas could result in crisis, escalation, conflict, and war if we're not very careful. So we need to identify both sides with what these strategic red lines are, and at a level of detail which prevents strategic surprise. Of course, it won't eliminate the risk of crisis, conflict, and war, but such an approach, in my judgment, would reduce it. Because at present, there are no such minimal strategic principles guiding the two countries around these red lines. Instead, we push and we shove, and we instead discover these red lines by accident. And sometimes accidents can be catastrophic. The second principle in managed strategic competition is if we can manage the first strategic red lines with a commonly agreed understanding diplomatically between the two governments in order to avoid conflict by accident, then in the rest of the relationship we can accept the reality that there can be non-lethal competition across everything else. The two countries will continue to grow their militaries. You can't stop that. They'll continue to expand their foreign policy influence where they can. You can't stop that. They'll continue to be strong economic competitors, as well as in trade, in investment, technology, and talent, and the rest. If we can reduce risk in strategic red line areas, and secondly, allow for non-lethal competition in all these other domains, then thirdly, we must also create political space for continued strategic collaboration. For example, on climate change, on the next pandemic, given how badly we together managed the last pandemic, and thirdly, on the continuing challenge of global financial stability. The fourth and final principle in managed strategic competition is this. You need, both in Beijing and in Washington, in Zhongnanhai and in the West Wing, you need a very small group of senior diplomats, like the National Security Office Advisor in the United States, and like the Yang Jiechi or the 中央军事委员会的副主任, to act as the continuing day-to-day policeman of this relationship, policeman of this jointly agreed strategic framework. So that if breaches occur, there can be immediate communication between the two sides. To conclude, I fully agree that you cannot eliminate the risk of crisis, conflict, and war. My proposal is simply that we embrace a joint strategic narrative between Beijing and Washington to reduce the risk of crisis, conflict and war.